Look, I'm gonna remarry your sister who inherited the entire estate. Poor folks should just disappear. My husband sneered at me. Next to my husband was my sister, conspicuously leaning on him. It's so pitiful that I've taken both the inheritance and your husband away from you. Taking everything from my sister feels absolutely fantastic. We're gonna live happily with Dad's fortune from now on. My sister said to me with a blissful look on her face. You're really stupid for renouncing such a huge inheritance from your dad. What a foolish woman. They mocked me, making me feel an intense anger boiling inside. Are these two really human? Their greed made them appear to me more like monsters than humans. Indeed, I had given up the inheritance from my recently deceased wealthy father. Right after that, my husband left me for my sister, who inherited everything. I heaved a deep sigh and then said to them, "All right. Let's get divorced." "Oh, you're taking this surprisingly well. I thought you'd cling and beg not to divorce," my husband remarked, surprised. But I had no love left for him. There was no way I would say such a thing. I signed the divorce papers my husband brought and handed them to him. "This means we're divorced. I'm gonna start a new life as a rich man now. It might be tough for a divorced woman like you to remarry, but try to keep your spirits up." They laughed heartily. Thus, our divorce was finalized, and it was 3 months later. I received a flood of calls from my ex-husband. Looking at the endless list of missed calls, I couldn't help but let out a slight smile. "You're just realizing it now, aren't you? It's too late. My name is Elizabeth. I'm 35 years old. I married James, who is 3 years older than me, 10 years ago, and we've lived as a working couple. Our son is 8 years old. His name is Michael. Michael was very clingy as a young child but has recently become more independent. James was quite helpful with childcare for about a year after Michael was born. Back then, he was actively helping out enough to be called a hands-on dad. However, as Michael grew older, James became less cooperative and eventually stopped helping altogether. Michael was a child who cried a lot at night, and this continued even after he turned 1. "Shut up! Why does this kid always cry in the middle of the night? Is something wrong with him?" James would shout, frustrated. "Don't say such awful things. It's normal for kids to cry at night until they're about a year and a half old. Don't call him something wrong," I responded, upset by James's harsh words. "Well, I just can't feel affection for Michael anymore. If he didn't cry so much at night, maybe I could have. Since he keeps crying, just make him stop. It's affecting my work tomorrow." James seemed to struggle with Michael's night crying. That was a major reason for his lack of cooperation with childcare. I tried everything to soothe Michael to sleep, from rocking him to taking him for car rides. James looked on with disdain. "Looking at you trying so hard just annoys me. You act like you're the only one struggling with childcare. It's irritating." Despite sometimes standing up to James, the resulting fights were so draining that I often opted to stay silent. Continuing to handle both household chores and childcare on my own, I managed until Michael was 2, at which point I returned to work and placed him in daycare. Even after I returned to work, James didn't help with either housework or childcare, so I ended up handling everything on my own through the hectic days. When I asked him for help, he'd just say, "I'm too tired," and would always relax on the sofa. I knew it would be better to ask for help from those around me, but I never asked my parents. My mother had passed away when I was young, and I didn't want to burden my elderly father. I do have a sister, but we've never gotten along. More accurately, she has always had a unilateral dislike for me. Her name is Mary, 3 years younger than me, making her currently 32. From a young age, Mary couldn't stand not being the center of attention. She hated it more than anything when I, as her older sister, was given priority. There's one incident with Mary that's particularly vivid in my memory. It was on the day our father bought me a new dress. My favorite dress had become worn from too much use, so Dad decided to buy me a new one. It was a refreshing dress adorned with sunflower patterns. I was overjoyed, thanking Dad repeatedly, and he was all smiles. However, that moment of happiness was quickly destroyed by Mary. She came running from another room and yelled, "What's with that dress? Why did Dad only buy a dress for you? I didn't get one. That's not fair. Not fair." "What are you talking about? You just got a new sweater and skirt not long ago." But Mary wasn't convinced and started crying and clinging to Dad. "Dad, please buy me a dress too. It's not fair that only Elizabeth gets one. Buy me one too." Despite Dad's attempts to calm her, Mary kept crying and making a scene. Reluctantly, Dad ended up buying her a dress too. Mary has always been envious of me, but there was never any truth to the notion that I was treated specially. Yet, Mary would often complain, saying, "It's not fair," and troubled the adults around her with her demands. When we were kids, adults often indulged her because she was the younger sister. As we grew up, she was told to be more patient, but Mary would twist logic to get her way. She frequently belittled me, boasting about being more loved by those around us. Mary hated me for always calmly admonishing her. She grew up to be willful and moved out as soon as she started college. Now, she lives without a steady job, relying on support from various people. She hasn't married yet. We haven't been in contact for years, and it seems we'll continue to live our lives with minimal interaction. The last time I saw Mary was at my wedding. She showed up in a white dress, so ostentatious it nearly overshadowed me. Wearing a white dress to a wedding is a well-known faux pas, which Mary surely knew. Yet, she chose to wear it deliberately. I'll never forget her sneering at me in my wedding dress, saying, "That doesn't suit you at all. Have you gained weight? Did you even go to a bridal spa?" During the reception, she drank excessively, became inebriated, and was bothering several men. I haven't seen Mary since that day. I know her contact details, but there's been no need to reach out without any particular reason. It seems she also hasn't returned home at all. James and I have considered divorce multiple times up to this point. But, flawed as he is, to Michael, he is still his only father. Making the final decision to divorce has been difficult. Then, one day, that happened. I got a call that my father had suddenly become ill and was rushed to the hospital. I explained the situation to my boss and hurried to the hospital. I tried to reach Mary but couldn't, so I sent her a message. After some time, I received a reply from Mary. "Dad's dying? Well, he is old. I've got a date today, so I can't go to the hospital. Let me know the time and place for the funeral, okay?" To say something like that when it's not even certain he's going to pass away. And to prioritize a date over your own parents, I just can't believe it. I was taken aback by Mary's sheer lack of common sense. While I was dealing with this, James also rushed to the hospital. "How's Dad's condition?" James seemed to have hurried over, panting heavily. "It looks really serious." "James, you're worried about my dad, thank you." Honestly, I was surprised that James was so concerned about my father. While Dad and James weren't on bad terms, they weren't particularly close either. In the end, Dad passed away. Since Mary never showed up at the hospital, it was just James and I who saw Dad off. "Dad!" Next to me, clinging and crying to my father's lifeless body, James was also crying, almost excessively so. It looked slightly unnatural. Then James helped with the funeral arrangements, and we informed Mary of the time and place. 4 days after Dad passed, we held the funeral, and Mary showed up with a big smile on her face. "Long time no see. Let's talk about the inheritance quickly, shall we?" She said it with a tone so cheery, you'd think there'd be a heart emoji at the end of her sentence. The truth is, our father was a wealthy man. Since our mother had passed away when we were young, the only heirs were us, the sisters. I told Mary calmly. "Today is the day of Dad's funeral. Let's talk about the inheritance some other time." Mary seemed displeased, but I ignored her and went around greeting the people who had come to my father's funeral. That night, after putting Michael to bed, I told James, "I've decided to renounce my inheritance." Then James exclaimed in astonishment, "What? Why?" "Keep your voice down. You'll wake Michael. I've thought this through, and I've decided to renounce the inheritance." I rebuked him, but James talked over me, getting agitated. "Why would you renounce the inheritance? Don't joke with me. Your father had a huge fortune, right? It's stupid not to inherit it. Please, calm down. We can't have a conversation if you're like this." Faced with James's fiery anger, I felt a growing sense of distrust. How can I not be angry? I will never accept you renouncing the inheritance. Stop spouting nonsense. Idiot. James was red in the face with anger, and a suspicion dawned on me. Could it be that James had been eyeing my father's inheritance all along? Considering this, I decided to ask James directly. "Were you after my dad's inheritance? Was all that crying when my dad passed away just an act?" Then James sneered and said disdainfully, "Yeah, that's right. So what if I was? If you want to call it acting, sure, but it was tears of joy. Thinking about how your dad finally died made me so happy. I thought I'd become rich." Hearing James's confession, I felt so angry and disappointed that everything seemed to darken before my eyes. How could he say something so terrible so calmly? To me, the man before me seemed not human, but a monster. "Well, no matter what you say, I'm renouncing the inheritance," I said quietly, and though James yelled, "You're really a big fool," my decision did not waver. Later, I informed Mary that I would renounce the inheritance, and she ended up inheriting everything from our father. Once it was official that Mary would inherit everything, James showed no more interest in me. He barely even greeted Michael, and his return home became later and later. Eventually, he stopped coming home altogether. "Mom, what happened to Dad?" "Dad is just very busy with work, Michael. You don't have to worry about anything," I frequently reassured Michael, who was worried. Then, after some time, I received a message from James saying, "I need to talk to you tonight." I decided to leave Michael with a nearby friend. It was because I felt he shouldn't be there for whatever was about to happen. As night fell, James came home with someone. "Hello." I recognized that voice. "Sorry for the sudden visit." Yes, the person who came home with James was my sister, Mary. The moment I saw James grinning, I had a pretty good idea of what he was about to say. We sat around the table, and James started talking excitedly. "You know, I've decided to divorce Elizabeth and marry Mary." "Oh? Is that because Mary inherited the entire estate from our dad?" At my question, James burst out laughing. "What's the matter? If you knew, why did you renounce the inheritance? You're really stupid. If you had just accepted the inheritance, we wouldn't be getting a divorce." As I remained silent, James began to berate me more aggressively. "Not only are you foolish enough to renounce the inheritance, but you're also not that pretty. Mary is way cuter. I was surprised when I saw Mary at our dad's funeral after a long time. She hasn't just maintained her beauty but has become even more beautiful. I thought I had no choice but to divorce you and be with Mary." It seems James had made his move on Mary. "It must be miserable to have both the inheritance and your husband taken away by me. Taking what belongs to my sister feels absolutely fantastic. I'm going to live happily ever after, even for you," Mary said to me with a blissful look on her face. "So, I'm going to remarry Mary, who inherited the entire estate from Dad. People like you, a poor person, should just disappear." James said that and laughed loudly with Mary. I let out a deep sigh and then told them, "All right, James. Let's get a divorce." "Oh, you're quite obedient. I thought you'd cling on and beg not to divorce." James was surprised, but I had no love left for him. There was no way I would say such a thing. How conceited can this man be? "But just so you know, I'm taking care of Michael." When I said this, James muttered as if he had forgotten. Oh, right. Of course, that's fine. Having a kid around would just be a nuisance for our luxurious new life with Mary. In fact, I had forgotten about Michael until just now. That's right, I have a son, don't I? What a terrible man. It's really good that Michael wasn't here to hear this. If by some chance Michael had heard such words, I shudder to think. I managed to keep my anger at bay and calmly told James. I'll be filing for child support through a lawyer later. Oh? If you wanted money, why did you renounce the inheritance? James laughed mockingly. Really? You make no sense at all. Mary leaned on James, mocking me too. Well, I'll just hand over a few $100,000 like it's nothing. After all, we're about to inherit Dad's vast fortune. Don't forget you said that. So, have you prepared the divorce papers? When I asked, James said, "Oh, that's right," and pulled the divorce papers out of his bag. I've filled in my part, so just sign yours quickly. All right. I filled in my section and handed it back to James. Great, now we can get divorced. You know, with your average looks and being a 35-year-old divorcee, I doubt you'll ever remarry. Indeed. Just like Mary said, your life is probably going to be hell from now on. What a miserable old hag. Facing the two of them laughing uproariously, I stood firm and said, We're done talking, so I'm going to pick up Michael now. Could you two make sure not to come back to this house until I've left? After telling him that, I went to pick up Michael from my friend's house. As soon as Michael saw me, he ran up with a big smile, shouting, "Mom," and hugged me tightly. His cuteness, combined with the stress I had been under, nearly brought me to tears. I thanked my friend and gave her some sweets I had bought from the department store in advance. My friend seemed to sense that something serious had happened and showed concern for me. Elizabeth, you look a bit pale. Are you okay? Remember, you can lean on me anytime you need to. I felt tears welling up again at her kindness. After expressing my gratitude to my friend multiple times, Michael and I left her house. Walking hand in hand with Michael through the night. He hummed a tune and swung my hand joyfully as we walked. Tears welled up in my eyes, perhaps my emotions were getting the better of me. It wasn't the time to cry. After all, I didn't have any reason to cry. The ones who were truly going to experience hell were not me, but those two. I resolved then that it would be the last time I would cry. From now on, Michael and I were going to walk a path of happiness together. When Michael and I got back home, James and Mary were nowhere to be seen. I soon started looking for a new place to live, found a suitable listing online, went to see it with a real estate agent, and signed the lease. I was fortunate to find a nice place within Michael's school district. I had been searching within the district because I didn't want to disrupt Michael's environment too much. Having prepared everything for the move, Michael and I left the house. Later, I demanded child support from James through a lawyer. With that money, I established a new foundation for our lives and started a new life with Michael. Michael seemed to really like our new home. He accepted the divorce easily. As long as I have you, Mom, I'm fine, he said with a smile. James's involvement in Michael's care had ceased after he turned 1, and since then, their interactions had been minimal. After I announced my intention to renounce the inheritance, James became even more distant, so for Michael, having a father was as good as not having one. I vowed to make Michael even happier than before. Luckily, I had a job, and with the alimony and child support from James and Mary, we didn't have to worry about our livelihood. Michael and I then began living a calm and enjoyable life. 3 months after the divorce, James suddenly called me. I was at work and didn't notice his call because my phone was in my bag. After work, when I checked my phone, I realized for the first time that there had been calls from James. I saw that James had called dozens of times. I also found several voicemails, so I listened to them, hearing James's voice, which sounded desperate. Call me back as soon as you can. I laughed to myself and thought, so, he's finally realized. Without returning the call, I put my phone back in my bag and made my way home. During the train ride, James kept calling non-stop, so, annoyed, I turned off my phone. After picking up Michael from school, we went home and had dinner together. By then, I had completely forgotten about James's calls. While eating, Michael excitedly told me about his day at school. Listening to his stories was what I loved the most. After we finished dinner, I suddenly remembered I had turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, James called immediately. I thought about ignoring it but decided to answer out of curiosity about their situation. Fortunately, Michael was doing his homework in another room, so he wouldn't hear the conversation. Hello? Hey! I've called you so many times. I even left voicemails. Why haven't you answered until now? James sounded infuriated, his voice cracking from shouting. Just calm down a bit. Can we talk more calmly? What do you want? I knew what he wanted, but I feigned ignorance and asked anyway. You tricked us, didn't you? You knew about the massive debt Dad had, didn't you? James's accusation made me unintentionally smile. What are you laughing at? You knew, didn't you? That's why you renounced the inheritance, right? Yes, indeed, my father had more debt than assets. He had been scammed in an investment fraud involving an apartment, leaving him in debt. The scam was pitched by a longtime friend, and Dad, without any suspicion, had fallen for it. Inheriting Dad's estate meant inheriting his debt as well. That's why I renounced the inheritance. Yes, I knew about Dad's debt. But saying I tricked you sounds so harsh. So, it's true. You did trick us. You never mentioned anything about the debt to James and Mary. James was so angry, I thought he might burst a blood vessel. I tried to explain about the debt when I told you I was renouncing the inheritance. But you just shouted me down and wouldn't listen to anything I said. I remained calm, contrasting James's fury. What do you mean? Are you trying to blame me now? It's clearly your fault. James continued to rant. But then he switched tactics, sounding smugly superior. But you know what? Things aren't going to go as you planned. You wanted to make us suffer, right? Well, we're going to renounce the inheritance too. Good thing we realized it early. What? I couldn't help but let out a dumbfounded response to James's grand misunderstanding. I said, we're renouncing the inheritance. That's not possible. What? This time it was James's turn to sound baffled. It's been months since you inherited. It's too late to renounce it now. And since you've already touched the inheritance, you couldn't renounce it. No, that's a lie, right? James's voice trembled. It's not a lie. A quick search would tell you. Make sure Mary knows too, that it's too late to renounce the inheritance. No, it's a lie. If we can't renounce the inheritance, what are we supposed to do? We'll be drowning in debt. That's right. But that's no longer my concern. So, I'm hanging up now. I ended the call. As expected, James and Mary ended up saddled with massive debt, struggling to make ends meet because of it. 3 months had passed since then. It was a holiday, so Michael and I made lots of pancakes in the morning, enjoying a slightly extravagant breakfast with various toppings. Then, my phone rang. It was a call from Mary. I considered ignoring it but figured she would just keep calling, so I decided to answer. However, I didn't want Michael to overhear our conversation. I told Michael, Mommy's going to take a call, keep eating, okay, and moved to another room before answering. Help me! Mary blurted out as soon as I answered. Even though she said that, there was no way I was going to help her. But first, I asked what happened. What happened? James is terrible. He's trying to run away by himself. He wants to divorce me. Even though I said I didn't want to, he insists on divorcing. Isn't he the worst? According to Mary, she and James are currently undergoing divorce mediation. Apparently, James is attempting to escape the debt by divorcing Mary, as the debt came about due to the inheritance. It's terrible, isn't it? I never thought James would be such a person. To just discard me so easily. Well, you did marry him targeting the inheritance he was after, and it was clear from the start he was a terrible man. You married him just to look down on me, right? This is your own doing. When I calmly told her this, Mary yelled back at me in tears. How can you say that? You've always been like this. Always lecturing me with your moral high ground since we were kids. You always looked at me so coldly. I hate you. Likewise, I hate you too. Whether you're going through divorce mediation or struggling with debt, it has nothing to do with me, so I'm ending this call now. As I was about to hang up, Mary, in a panic, screamed. Wait. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry for saying I hate you. We're the only sisters each other has. Please help me. Give me back the money, please. What? Return the money? That's not going to happen. There's nothing I can do for you. I replied, utterly astonished. It's not true. You can give me money. Please, I'm begging you. $60,000, no, $40,000 would be fine. Just give me some money. I refuse. Why don't you ask James? Goodbye. With that, I ended the call. I later learned that the inheritance included stocks, which had plummeted, significantly increasing the total debt. After Mary kept calling, I blocked her number. Several months passed, and Michael and I continued to live our peaceful lives, having completely forgotten about Mary and James. Suddenly one day, curious about what had happened to them, I decided to hire a private investigator. The investigation revealed that Mary and James's divorce had been finalized. Post-divorce, Mary was juggling night and day jobs, barely managing to make ends meet for her debt repayment. However, even with her beauty, Mary was struggling to attract clients in the nightlife, facing hard times as she aged. The men who used to support her single-handedly deserted her after discovering her massive debt. Desperate, Mary clung to these men, one of whom, feeling threatened, revealed his affair with Mary to his wife. Most of Mary's supporters were much older, married men. My friend had spotted Mary in the nightlife district, wearing a cheap dress, desperately trying to attract customers in the cold. Hey, won't you come have a drink? She tried to call over every man, but stressed and looking worn, nobody gave her any attention. Eventually, she was too persistent with a businessman who yelled at her, "Lady, you're too annoying." That man was quickly approached by a younger, more attractive woman and went into a club with her. Watching this scene, Mary broke down crying. Even after hearing this story, I felt no sympathy for Mary. It was all the result of her own actions. As for James, after their divorce, he got entangled with another troublesome woman. And he ended up with a significant amount of debt he couldn't escape. To repay this debt, James started another job in addition to his main employment. Working tirelessly, James was caught due to his main job's no-side job policy and was fired. Now considering bankruptcy, James's plight seemed fitting for such a despicable man. While reading the private investigator's report, I smiled at the fitting end for such a terrible man. In contrast to them, Michael and I continued our peaceful lives. We've recently got a dog, making us a family of 3. My job is going well, and I've just been promoted. With both my career and home life flourishing, I'm living happily.